in the matter. So we'll start with the matter. You did present a team line right at the top. The team line, the way you framed it was that it's not justified, the ban. And I guess what I would have liked to have seen is an answer to the question of why it's not justified. It's not justified because it infringes upon freedom of speech. That's where you went with it. But in terms of the way you laid out the team line at the beginning, you just said, we oppose this because it's not justified. So be sure to get, the gist of what was your later arguments right up at the top there and say it's not justified because it violates freedom of expression. Just make that your complete team line, and that way you're clear right from the very outset of your speech where your team is going in terms of their strategy. You did provide a really nice preview, a nice overview of your main points at the beginning. And the refutation was good. There were a couple of moments in the refutation. I'm going to spend more time talking about that because you spent the bulk of your speech on refutation. More time talking about some of the choices you made in there. I liked in general the approach you take to saying, if the government's claiming it's going to decrease all these things, we're going to tell you why it's not only not going to decrease, but it's actually going to increase. And I think that's a good general tactic to take because in terms of refutation, you're saying, yes, it's going to have the opposite effect of what they're claiming it will have. The problem was with a couple of the arguments, the first one you talked about the restriction on the recordings would cause more fear. You didn't offer any evidence for why it would. Is there an example of where a ban on this has happened? And I know from a previous debate earlier that, and I know everyone's been debating this topic, but one of your classmates found some evidence where in Northern Ireland they did a ban on some of these recordings, and actually the terrorist attacks increased after the ban was in place. So that's what your argument there needed. It needed something to say, okay, it's going to increase fear, but you didn't have that specific example to help support what you were trying to do there. The third point of refutation, when you got to talking about violence on TV and radio, I was a little bit confused about where some of the refutation was going, just in the sense that you talked about violence in cartoons and so forth. And it seemed from the way you presented it, and I don't think this is what you intended, but it seemed like you were trying to suggest that what the government was trying to do was ban all violence from television, and mischaracterize their argument a little bit, because it kind of overstates what the government was trying to do, if that's what you're trying to do, which in some ways isn't a bad strategy in the sense of taking on, showing, the extreme consequences of what the government's proposing doing. On the other hand, it's also a logical fallacy called a slippery slope. They're starting with just banning terrorist acts, and you're taking it to Bugs Bunny cartoons. There's a big leap in between those two, right? And it does illustrate that there are violence in other areas of television and so forth, but, let's face it, the violence of a cartoon is very different in most respects from the violence of a video of a terrorist group doing a beheading or something like that. So I think just be careful with overstating your case, in an attempt to provide strong refutation, mischaracterizing their case or trying to claim something that's a little too broad, because I think that's what was going on there. One thing that I think you did, and it might have been partly for the time limit, it seemed like you took the tack of trying to weave the arguments for your side into the refutation, do them simultaneously. And one thing that happens when you do that, be sure to explain at the beginning of the speech that that's what you're doing. That our advocacy is going to be part of this, because I was waiting after the refutation for you to present your new arguments, but I knew looking at the time, you had already presented them in effect. They were part of that. But you hadn't told us that that's what you were doing ahead of time, so I didn't know if you were just running long on your refutation arguments or you had taken a different approach. So when you give your preview of main points, I think it's important to explain to the adjudicators in the audience, this is what I'm doing. I think my responses in terms of refutation, both illustrate and build on the positive matter that I want to present in the round, so I'm going to combine them into one and take that approach in presenting my speech today. As long as you tell the adjudicators in the audience that's what you're doing, it's okay, but you didn't tell us that at the beginning, so it made it a little bit confusing. A couple of comments now on manner. We've been talking all about matter. I've seen you do 2 speeches today, and in this one, there's a big difference, just in terms of the confidence in your delivery, but also like the passion you brought to the vocal delivery. You know, you really seem to be committed to your ideas, and not overly so, just in a way that you were showing, you know, I believe in this, I'm taking this seriously, and I want you as audience and adjudicators to take it seriously as well. I liked the energy that you brought very early in your refutation to the statement that you made to all of us. If you don't like what's on TV, just turn it off. You know, that was good energy, and particularly in comparison to the first debate I saw you do today, you were making much more eye contact with the audience, really trying to engage us in that way as well. So overall, really strong in terms of manner, and I thought, you know, even between one speech this morning and one this afternoon, a big difference in the manner that you brought to the speech, and it had a big impact in terms of helping us to understand your ideas and the persuasiveness of your ideas.